The mechanic's flashlight beam cut through the belly of the Boeing 737 and stopped on something that should not exist. Marcus Brennan had been inspecting aircraft fuselages for 22 years at a private maintenance facility in rural Nevada, and he thought he had seen everything: corroded panels, smuggled contraband, even a mummified cat once trapped between insulation layers. But what he found wedged behind a false panel during a routine pressurization repair would haunt him for the rest of his life. A makeshift cradle constructed from foam padding and cargo netting, barely visible in the aircraft's lower equipment bay. And inside it, wrapped in what appeared to be airline blankets, a newborn infant, still breathing. Before we continue, make sure you hit subscribe right now. This channel uncovers the aviation mysteries and forbidden incidents the industry desperately tries to bury. Turn on notifications because what we investigate here never makes it to official reports. The aircraft in question was a retired passenger jet being stripped for parts, previously operated by a now-defunct Central American carrier that had ceased operations 8 months earlier. Marcus had been assigned to assess structural damage in the forward cargo compartment where moisture had compromised several riveted seams. The work was mundane, methodical. He had peeled back insulation panels dozens of times that week alone. But on this particular Thursday afternoon in late September, his pry bar caught on something unusual: a seam that had been deliberately sealed with industrial adhesive rather than standard rivets. He remembers the exact moment. The adhesive cracked with a sound like breaking ice, and behind it was a cavity approximately 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep, not part of the original aircraft design. Someone had carved out space between the pressure hull and the outer skin, creating a hidden compartment invisible to standard inspections. The foam padding inside was aviation grade, the kind used in first-class seats. The netting appeared to be repurposed cargo restraints. And in the center, nested in layers of blankets still bearing the airline's logo, was the infant. Marcus dropped his flashlight. The beam spun across the fuselage wall, casting wild shadows, and when he picked it up with shaking hands, he saw the baby's chest rise and fall. Tiny fingers curled into fists, eyes closed, skin pale but warm, a hospital wristband still attached to one impossibly small wrist, though the ink had faded beyond legibility. His first instinct was to scream for help, but something stopped him. The silence of the hangar felt suddenly oppressive, deliberate. He was supposed to be alone. The facility operated on skeleton crew during off hours, and he had volunteered for the evening shift to earn overtime. Nobody knew he was in this particular aircraft. Nobody was supposed to find what he had just discovered. Marcus climbed out of the fuselage and ran to the supervisor's office, his boots echoing on concrete that suddenly seemed to stretch for miles. The supervisor, a former Air Force maintenance chief named Rodriguez, looked up from paperwork with the practiced disinterest of someone who had heard every possible excuse for delayed work. But when Marcus described what he had found, Rodriguez's expression changed completely. He stood without a word, grabbed a medical kit from the wall, and both men sprinted back to the aircraft. The baby was still breathing when they carefully extracted the cradle from its hiding place. Rodriguez, who had emergency medical training, checked vital signs with hands that trembled despite decades of experience. Pulse, weak but steady. Body temperature, slightly below normal but not dangerously so. No visible injuries. The infant appeared to be approximately 3 to 4 weeks old, though determining exact age would require hospital evaluation. What terrified both men was the implication of the setup. This was not a panicked abandonment. This was engineered. Someone had known exactly where to hide a living infant in an aircraft fuselage in a way that would provide minimal temperature regulation, some soundproofing, and protection from pressure changes if the plane were still operational. Someone with deep knowledge of aircraft systems. Someone who had access to restricted areas. Someone who expected the baby to be retrieved. But the plane had been grounded for 8 months. Emergency services arrived within 12 minutes of Rodriguez's call. Paramedics transferred the infant to a neonatal unit where doctors would later describe the case as medically impossible. Newborns require feeding every 2 to 3 hours. They cannot regulate body temperature effectively. Dehydration sets in rapidly. By every medical standard, this child should have died within 24 hours of being placed in that compartment. Yet preliminary examination suggested the infant had been there for days, possibly longer. IV marks on tiny arms indicated recent medical intervention. Stomach contents showed traces of formula. But there was no feeding apparatus in the cradle, no water source, no waste disposal system. The FBI arrived before dawn. They cordoned off the entire maintenance facility and seized the aircraft as evidence. Marcus and Rodriguez were separated and questioned for 7 hours each. The questions focused obsessively on who else had access to that particular plane, who had worked on it recently, whether either man had noticed anything unusual in previous weeks. But the most disturbing questions came near the end of Marcus's interrogation, when an agent he had not seen before entered the room carrying a manila folder. The agent asked if Marcus had ever heard of Operation CRADLE. Marcus said no. The agent studied him for a long moment, then slid a photograph across the table. It showed another aircraft, different model, different airline. Another hidden compartment. Another cradle. This one empty, but clearly designed with the same methodology. Same foam padding, same netting configuration, same impossible placement between hull layers that should not have enough space to hide anything larger than avionics cables. There were 6 more photographs in that folder, 6 more aircraft, 4 more with cradles still containing infants, all discovered in similar circumstances. Maintenance work on grounded or decommissioned planes, revealing compartments that should not exist. 2 of the infants had survived, 2 had not. Each case had been classified immediately. Each facility had been shut down within hours of discovery. No public announcements, no missing persons reports that matched, no apparent connection between the airlines involved except that all had operated routes through Central and South America before going bankrupt or ceasing operations. The agent asked Marcus if he understood why this could never be made public. Marcus understood perfectly. Because if these compartments existed, if they had been deliberately constructed, if newborn infants were being systematically hidden in commercial aircraft, then the implications went far beyond smuggling or trafficking. This was coordinated. This required expertise, resources, and access that suggested involvement at levels that would destroy public confidence in aviation safety completely. Every parent who had ever flown with a child would wonder if something else had been hidden in the walls around them. Every mechanic would begin questioning what they had missed. The entire system would collapse under the weight of paranoia. But Marcus asked the question anyway. Who was doing this and why? The agent closed the folder and stood to leave. Before exiting the room, he turned back and said something that Marcus would replay in his mind every night since. He said that sometimes investigations reveal patterns that are worse than having no answers at all. He said that in 3 of the cases, DNA testing had identified the infants' mothers. All 3 women had been reported missing during flights over remote jungle regions. All 3 had been pregnant when they disappeared. And in all 3 cases, aviation authorities had concluded that the aircraft involved had experienced no mechanical issues whatsoever. The planes had simply continued flying. Marcus was released with a non-disclosure agreement that promised federal prosecution if he discussed anything he had witnessed. He signed it. He went home. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw that cradle wedged into the impossible space between metal panels, and he wondered how many other aircraft were still flying with secrets hidden in their walls. The infant, he discovered, was placed in protective custody. No family members came forward. No missing persons reports matched. Hospital staff who treated the baby were instructed never to discuss the case, and within a week, the child had been transferred to an undisclosed location. Marcus tried to follow up through official channels, but every inquiry was met with the same response. The matter was classified. Further questions would be considered interference with an ongoing federal investigation. 3 months after the discovery, Marcus received a visitor at his home, a woman in her mid-50s, well-dressed, carrying a leather briefcase. She introduced herself as an attorney representing what she called concerned parties within the aviation industry. She asked if Marcus would be willing to sign an additional agreement in exchange for a substantial financial settlement. She emphasized that the settlement was not an admission of wrongdoing by any party, but rather a gesture of appreciation for his discretion and cooperation. Marcus asked what would happen if he refused. The attorney smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. She said that would be unfortunate. She said that mechanics who raised concerns about aircraft safety sometimes found their certifications under unexpected review. She said that federal databases were complicated systems, and occasionally records became corrupted. She said that Marcus had a daughter in college and elderly parents who depended on his income. She placed the briefcase on his kitchen table and opened it to reveal documents and a cashier's check with more zeros than Marcus earned in 5 years. He signed, but signing did not stop the nightmares. It did not stop him from researching obsessively, using public records and aviation databases to track aircraft that had been decommissioned or scrapped in the months following his discovery. He found patterns. Planes retired suddenly despite being airworthy. Maintenance facilities that closed without explanation. Mechanics who had worked on specific aircraft types who no longer appeared in industry databases. And he found something else. A forum buried deep in aviation enthusiast websites where anonymous users discussed strange discoveries during aircraft maintenance. Most posts were mundane, but occasionally someone would describe finding modified compartments, unusual wiring, or spaces that did not match technical schematics. These posts were always deleted within hours, but Marcus learned to screenshot them first. One post from a mechanic in Colombia described finding a cradle identical to the one Marcus had discovered. The mechanic had photographed it before authorities arrived. The photo showed the same foam padding, the same netting, the same impossible placement, but there was one additional detail that made Marcus's blood freeze. Attached to the inside of the compartment was a small electronic device with LED indicators. The mechanic speculated it might be a monitoring system, possibly measuring temperature, oxygen levels, or other environmental factors. Someone was keeping these infants alive remotely. Someone had the technology to sustain newborns in sealed compartments with no direct human intervention for extended periods. And if that technology existed, if it was being deployed systematically across multiple aircraft, then the scope of this operation was far larger than a few isolated incidents. Marcus began mapping the routes of affected aircraft. He traced their flight paths in the months before decommissioning, looking for commonalities. What he found was deeply disturbing. Most had operated regular routes over specific regions, known for weak government oversight, limited radar coverage, and vast stretches of unpopulated terrain. These were routes where aircraft could deviate slightly from filed flight plans without raising immediate concerns. Routes where precise navigation was difficult to verify. Routes where something could be transferred between aircraft mid-flight if the coordination was sophisticated enough. He thought about the mothers the FBI agent had mentioned, pregnant women who disappeared during flights over jungle regions. He thought about the infants found in hidden compartments months after those same aircraft were grounded. And he considered a possibility so horrifying that he initially dismissed it as paranoid fantasy. What if the compartments were not just for hiding infants after birth? What if they were designed for something that happened during flight? Medical technology for remote surgery had advanced dramatically in recent years. Telemedicine allowed procedures to be performed with minimal direct human intervention. Automated systems could monitor vital signs, administer medications, even assist with emergency procedures if properly programmed. If someone had adapted that technology for aircraft installation, if they had created sealed medical chambers within fuselage compartments, they could theoretically perform procedures that required specific environmental conditions found only at altitude. Marcus knew how insane this sounded, but he also knew that the evidence did not fit any conventional explanation. Newborns do not survive for days without feeding. Hidden compartments do not spontaneously appear in commercial aircraft. Women do not vanish from planes without mechanical failure or crew awareness. Unless someone very powerful wanted all of those things to happen exactly as they did. He started carrying a recorder everywhere, documenting his findings in audio files he uploaded to encrypted cloud storage. He made copies of every document, every photograph, every forum post he had collected. He told his daughter that if anything happened to him, she should immediately contact specific journalists whose names he provided along with access codes. Nothing happened to him, but the investigation stopped. The FBI closed its inquiries with no public statement. The aircraft Marcus had been working on was quietly scrapped, every component destroyed rather than resold. The maintenance facility where he had made the discovery was purchased by a shell corporation and demolished within 6 months. Marcus was transferred to a different facility across the state, and the infant he had found was never mentioned again in any official capacity. But Marcus still works in aviation maintenance. He still inspects fuselages and pulls back insulation panels. And sometimes, late at night when he is alone in a hangar with only the sound of his own breathing and the metallic echoes of his tools, he runs his hands along seams that look just slightly wrong. He presses his ear against hull panels and listens for sounds that should not be there. He has found 3 more modified compartments since that September evening, all empty, all showing evidence of recent use, all removed and sealed before he could document them properly. The most recent was 2 weeks ago in an aircraft that had been flying scheduled passenger routes until it was suddenly retired for what the airline called routine fleet optimization. Marcus was assigned to assess its salvage value. He found the compartment in the aft cargo area, hidden behind environmental control ducting. No cradle this time, but there were anchor points where one had been secured. And on the foam padding, barely visible in his flashlight beam, was a small handprint. The size suggested a child's hand. The placement suggested someone had pressed against the padding from inside the compartment, perhaps in sleep or distress. Marcus took photographs this time, even though he knew they would likely disappear from his phone within hours as previous images had. He measured the compartment dimensions. He documented the anchor configuration. He collected a foam sample in a sealed bag, and then he sealed the panel, filed his standard inspection report, and went home. Because he knows now what he did not know 3 years ago. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some truths are too dangerous to expose. And some operations are protected by forces that view individual mechanics as utterly expendable obstacles to be removed with the same efficiency they apply to sealing hidden compartments and eliminating inconvenient evidence. But what Marcus cannot forget, what keeps him inspecting those aircraft despite knowing the risk, is that somewhere there might be another infant hidden in another impossible space. Another newborn whose survival depends on someone finding them before the aircraft is scrapped or the monitoring systems fail. Another life that exists in the gap between what official aviation authorities acknowledge and what actually happens 30,000 feet above the earth, where no one is watching, and anything is possible if you have enough money and influence. The baby Marcus found 3 years ago would be walking now, talking, developing personality and preferences, living somewhere under a name that was given by strangers, with no knowledge of how they came to exist or what circumstances surrounded their birth. Perhaps they are safe. Perhaps they are loved. Perhaps the people caring for them have no idea what happened in the hours and days after they were born. Or perhaps they are part of something much larger, a program or operation that views human life as a resource to be managed and relocated according to plans that ordinary people are not meant to understand. Marcus will never know, but he will keep looking. He will keep running his hands along suspicious seams and listening at panels that resonate wrong. Because if he stops, if he accepts that this is simply how things are and nothing can be changed, then he becomes complicit in whatever horror is happening in the hidden spaces of aircraft that carry families and children every single day. The aviation industry is built on trust. Passengers trust that aircraft are safe, properly maintained, and operated by people who value human life above all else. But trust requires ignorance. It requires not thinking too carefully about what happens behind locked maintenance doors, or what inspectors might find when they tear away the layers of metal and insulation that separate travelers from the machinery keeping them airborne. Marcus no longer has that luxury of ignorance. He sees every aircraft now as a potential hiding place, every pressurized fuselage as a possible chamber for secrets that would destroy careers and topple corporations if they were ever fully exposed. And on nights when sleep will not come, he thinks about all the aircraft currently flying, thousands of them, crossing oceans and continents, carrying millions of passengers who will never know what might be hidden just beyond the walls of their cabin, who will never hear the sounds that maintenance crews sometimes report, faint crying or scratching that stops the moment someone investigates, who will trust that every part of the aircraft has been properly inspected and certified safe.
Marcus knows better. Marcus knows that certification is only as thorough as the inspectors are allowed to be, and that there are places in every aircraft where documentation ends and plausible deniability begins. Places where someone with the right access and motivation can install systems that exist nowhere in official schematics. Places where impossible things happen because the alternative is believing that respected institutions and trusted authorities would never allow such things to occur. But they do allow it, or they participate in it, or they simply look away when confronted with evidence that asking more questions would be career-ending or worse. The baby Marcus found was evidence of all those things. A living, breathing reminder that reality is far stranger and darker than most people can accept. And somewhere, right now, there might be another one waiting to be discovered. What would you do if you found something like this during a routine inspection? Do you think operations like this could really exist without public knowledge, or is there a rational explanation we are missing? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more forbidden aviation investigations that expose what the industry never wants you to see.